October 1944. The Western Pacific Ocean. 50 Japanese warships vanished from existence in less than 5 minutes. Not one sailor saw it coming. Not one lookout spotted the enemy. Not one commander understood what was happening. The greatest naval ambush in human history unfolded in total darkness, and the men who died never knew who killed them. This is the story of how a former radio technician from rural Iowa changed everything. His name was Harold Van Ness. He was 26 years old. He had never fired a gun in combat. He had never commanded a ship. But the device he helped perfect would destroy more enemy vessels in a single night than any admiral in history. The Japanese called it ghost fire. American sailors called it the death ray. In reality, it was something far more revolutionary. It was the moment when human eyes became obsolete in naval warfare. And by the time the sun rose over the Pacific that morning, 50 ships had disappeared. 8,000 men were dead, and the Japanese Navy would never recover. But to understand how one invisible technology changed everything, we need to go back to the beginning. Back to when America was losing. The year was 1942. The United States Navy was bleeding. Every week brought new reports of disaster. Destroyers sunk, cruisers torpedoed, entire task forces scattered by enemies they never saw coming. The problem was not courage. American sailors had plenty of that. The problem was not firepower. American guns were among the best in the world. The problem was darkness. Night battles in the Pacific were slaughters. Japanese naval forces had trained for decades to fight without light. Their lookouts could spot enemy ships at distances American crews could not imagine. Their captains had memorized attack patterns that exploited every shadow, every cloud, every moment of confusion that darkness created. The results were catastrophic. At the Battle of Savo Island, Japanese cruisers approached an Allied fleet at night and opened fire before anyone knew they were there. In less than an hour, 4 heavy cruisers were sinking. Over 1,000 sailors were dead or dying in burning oil slicks. The enemy escaped without losing a single ship. This was not an isolated incident. It was a pattern. Guadalcanal, Tassafaronga, Cape Esperance. Night after night, American ships sailed into darkness and never returned. Intelligence reports painted a terrifying picture. Japanese lookouts were not superhuman. They were simply better trained. Some had spent years developing their night vision through special diets and exercises. Others used binoculars designed specifically for low-light conditions. Their entire naval doctrine revolved around one simple truth: whoever sees first wins. And in darkness, Japanese eyes were the best in the world. American commanders tried everything. They ordered ships to fire star shells to illuminate enemy positions. The shells revealed their own locations faster than the enemy's. They attempted coordinated searchlight attacks. The searchlights made their ships perfect targets. They sent scout planes ahead to spot threats. The planes could not see anything in the black Pacific night. Nothing worked. The death toll climbed. Families across America received telegrams that began with the same terrible words: "We regret to inform you." By mid-1943, the Navy had lost more sailors to night engagements than to any other cause. Morale was crumbling. Commanders were desperate. Something had to change. But what? How do you fight an enemy you cannot see? How do you win a war in the dark? The answer would come from the most unlikely place imaginable. Not from an admiral, not from a weapons designer, not from anyone the Navy had ever heard of, but from a quiet young man who spent his days staring at glowing screens in a cramped room below deck. His idea was considered insane. His superiors laughed at him. His colleagues thought he was wasting everyone's time. They were all wrong. Harold Van Ness grew up on a farm outside Cedar Rapids, Iowa. His father raised corn and hogs. His mother taught Sunday school at the local church. Nothing about his childhood suggested he would change the course of history. But Harold had one unusual gift. He could fix anything electronic. By age 12, he had built his own radio from spare parts. By 15, he was repairing equipment for neighbors across 3 counties. When the war came, the Navy did not want Harold as a fighter. They wanted his hands and his mind. They assigned him to the radar division. Radar in 1942 was a miracle and a disappointment. The technology could detect enemy aircraft at impressive distances. It could track storms and map coastlines. But using it to aim weapons was considered impossible. The screens were fuzzy. The signals bounced unpredictably. Targets appeared and disappeared without warning. Most officers viewed radar as a fancy alarm system, nothing more. You might know enemies were coming, but you still needed eyes to fight them. Harold disagreed. He spent months studying the equipment, not just operating it but understanding it. He noticed patterns others missed. He saw connections between signal strength and distance that nobody had documented. He began to wonder something dangerous. What if radar could do more than detect? What if it could aim? The idea seemed ridiculous. Radar screens showed blobs, not precise locations. The technology updated too slowly to track fast-moving ships. Conditions changed second by second, while radar data lagged behind. Every expert Harold consulted told him the same thing. It cannot be done. Forget it. Focus on your real job. But Harold could not forget. He kept running calculations in his head. He kept sketching diagrams during meals. He kept imagining a different kind of night battle. One where American ships did not need to see the enemy. One where darkness worked against the Japanese instead of for them. One night in early 1943, Harold was monitoring radar during a routine patrol. The screen showed contacts several miles away. Japanese ships, probably. Too far to engage. Too dark to see. By morning, they would be gone. Harold watched those blips move across his screen. He tracked their speed. He calculated their heading. And suddenly, everything clicked. He realized he was watching the enemy in real time. Not perfectly, not precisely, but enough. Enough to know where they were. Enough to know where they would be. Enough, he thought, to kill them. Harold's idea was elegant and terrifying. Instead of using radar just for detection, he proposed connecting it directly to fire control systems. Ships would aim their guns not at what they could see, but at what radar told them was there. The enemy would never know they were being targeted. The first shots would arrive without warning. Darkness would become an American weapon. His commanding officer listened to the proposal for exactly 90 seconds before cutting him off. "Do you understand what you are suggesting?" the officer asked. "You want us to fire blind. You want us to trust a machine instead of our eyes. You want us to shoot at ghosts." Harold tried to explain. The targets were not ghosts. They were mathematical certainties. Radar showed position. Position predicted movement. Movement determined aim. The calculations were complex, but solvable. A good fire control computer could handle everything. The officer was not convinced. Neither was anyone else. The technical challenges alone seemed insurmountable. Radar signals fluctuated constantly. Ocean conditions affected accuracy. Enemy ships changed speed without warning. Even if the theory worked, The margin for error was enormous. One officer put it bluntly, "You are asking us to bet ships and lives on equipment that cannot tell the difference between a battleship and a rainstorm." Harold accepted the criticism, but refused to abandon the idea. He requested permission to conduct small-scale tests during routine patrols. Permission was denied. He asked to work with fire control technicians to model the calculations. His request was ignored. For 6 months, Harold pursued his vision alone, working during off hours, borrowing equipment without authorization, building prototypes from salvaged parts. His fellow sailors thought he had lost his mind. They called him the Ghost Hunter. They made jokes about firing torpedoes at clouds. Harold ignored them. He had seen something nobody else could see, and he was determined to prove it. The breakthrough came in September 1943. Harold had finally assembled a crude but functional prototype. He had connected a modified radar unit to a mechanical calculator that could convert screen data into firing coordinates. The system was ugly, unreliable, and technically unauthorized, but Harold believed it would work. He needed a test, a real test, against a real target. The opportunity came during a supply convoy escort mission. Intelligence reported Japanese submarines operating in the area. Standard procedure called for depth charges deployed based on sonar contacts. Harold proposed something different. Let the radar track surface movements, while sonar handled depths. Let the systems work together. Let the mathematics prove themselves. His immediate supervisor, a lieutenant named Frank Morrison, was skeptical but curious. Morrison had watched Harold work for months. He had seen the calculations. He had read the technical notes Harold compiled during countless sleepless nights. Against his better judgment, Morrison agreed to a limited test. If contacts appeared, Harold could provide coordinates. The gun crews would decide whether to trust them. The contacts appeared just after midnight. 3 blips on Harold's modified screen, moving together approximately 12 miles east. Japanese destroyers, most likely, hunting the convoy. Harold's system processed the data and produced coordinates, range, bearing, projected position. He reported the numbers to Morrison, who relayed them to the gunnery officer. The response was immediate and dismissive. Those coordinates put the targets beyond visual range. Nobody could confirm them. Firing blind violated every procedure in the book. Morrison looked at Harold. Harold said nothing. He simply pointed at his screen, where the blips continued their steady approach. Morrison made a decision that would change naval history. "Fire," he said. 5 minutes later, 3 Japanese destroyers were burning. American guns had hit targets no American eye had seen. The Ghost Hunter had proven his ghosts were real. News of the test spread through the fleet within days. Officers who had dismissed Harold as a dreamer suddenly wanted to meet him. Technical teams arrived to examine his prototype. Within weeks, the Navy had authorized full development of what would become known as radar-directed fire control. But this was only the beginning. The small-scale success against destroyers proved the concept worked. What remained was proving it could work at scale, against entire fleets, against the best night-fighting navy in the world. The Japanese had not yet faced this new threat. They continued training their lookouts. They continued perfecting their night tactics. They continued believing that darkness was their domain. They had no idea what was coming. In Part 2, we will follow Harold Van Ness as his invention faces its ultimate test. We will witness the largest night battle in Pacific history. We will see 50 Japanese ships sail into darkness, confident in their superiority, certain of victory. and we will watch as every single one of those ships discovers the terrible truth. The night no longer belonged to human eyes. The age of invisible warfare had begun, and nothing would ever be the same. Harold Van Ness had done the impossible. A farm boy from Iowa had proven that American ships could hit targets no human eye could see. 3 Japanese destroyers burned as evidence. The mathematics worked. The technology worked. The ghost hunter had caught his ghosts. But proving a concept in one small engagement was nothing compared to what came next. Convincing the United States Navy to abandon 200 years of naval doctrine would require something far more difficult than mathematics. It would require changing minds that did not want to change. And the man standing in Harold's way was one of the most powerful admirals in the Pacific Fleet. His name was Vice Admiral Theodore Blackwood. He had commanded warships for 30 years. He had survived Pearl Harbor. He had earned every medal the Navy could give. And he believed, with absolute certainty, that Harold Van Ness was a dangerous fool, whose ideas would get American sailors killed. Vice Admiral Blackwood was 61 years old when he first heard about radar-directed fire control. He had spent 4 decades mastering the art of naval warfare. He had studied under legends. He had trained thousands of officers. He had watched countless young men propose revolutionary ideas, and he had watched most of those ideas fail spectacularly when theory met reality. In his experience, technology was a tool, not a replacement for seamanship. Good eyes, steady nerves, and proper training won battles. Machines broke down. Machines gave false readings. Machines could not adapt to chaos. Men could. When Lieutenant Morrison's report about the destroyer engagement reached headquarters, Blackwood read it with growing irritation. The report claimed that guns had successfully engaged targets beyond visual range using radar data alone. Blackwood saw only recklessness. One lucky hit against slow-moving destroyers proved nothing. What happened when the enemy maneuvered? What happened when multiple targets appeared simultaneously? What happened when the radar malfunctioned at the critical moment? Blackwood summoned Harold Van Ness to headquarters for what the staff called a technical review. Everyone understood it was actually a trial. The meeting took place in a cramped conference room at Pearl Harbor. Harold arrived in a freshly pressed uniform that still showed wrinkles from the transport ship. He carried a folder containing 6 months of calculations, test results, and technical diagrams. Across the table sat Vice Admiral Blackwood, flanked by 4 senior officers who had already made their opinions clear through their silence. Blackwood did not waste time on pleasantries. "You are the technician who wants to fire blind," he said. That was not a question, it was an accusation. Harold kept his voice steady. "I am proposing radar-directed fire control, sir. The system does not fire blind. It fires using data that is more reliable than human vision at night." Blackwood leaned forward. "More reliable? You're telling me that a machine is more reliable than trained lookouts who have served this Navy for their entire careers?" "I am telling you that radar can detect targets at 12 miles, Harold replied. "The best lookouts in the world cannot see past 3 miles in darkness. Radar does not get tired. Radar does not blink. Radar does not get confused by smoke or weather." One of the senior officers spoke up. "And what happens when your precious radar shows a contact that is not there? What happens when we waste ammunition shooting at phantom targets while the real enemy flanks us?" Harold opened his folder. In 217 test observations, the system produced only 4 false positives. All four were identified and corrected within 60 seconds. The accuracy rate is 98.2%. Blackwood slammed his palm on the table. Accuracy in tests means nothing. You have never commanded men in battle. You have never watched a ship explode because someone trusted the wrong information. You sit in your little room, staring at screens, while real sailors die. And now you want to tell us how to fight? For a moment, Harold said nothing. Then he asked a question that silenced the room. How many ships have we lost in night battles this year, Admiral? The number was 47. 47 American vessels, sunk or damaged beyond repair, in nighttime engagements during 1943 alone. Blackwood knew the figure. Every man in that room knew it. The Japanese owned the night. Their lookouts spotted American ships first. Their torpedoes launched before anyone knew death was coming. Their tactics exploited every weakness that darkness created. And American sailors kept dying because American guns could not hit what American eyes could not see. Harold pressed forward. 47 ships, sir. How many men? Blackwood's jaw tightened. That is not relevant to this discussion. Harold disagreed. It is the only thing relevant to this discussion. I am not asking you to trust a machine. I am asking you to give your sailors a chance to fight back. Right now, they sail into darkness knowing they probably will not see the enemy until it is too late. My system changes that equation. It gives them the ability to strike first, to strike accurately, to survive. The room remained silent. Harold knew he had pushed too far. Junior technicians did not lecture vice admirals about tactics. Junior technicians did not question decisions made by men with decades of experience. He expected to be dismissed, possibly court-martialed. Instead, Blackwood stared at him for a long moment. Then he spoke 3 words that would change everything. Prove it again. The condition was brutal. Harold would have one official test, supervised by Admiral Blackwood personally. If the system performed as claimed, development would proceed. If it failed, Harold would be reassigned to a supply depot in Alaska, and his research would be classified and buried. There would be no second chances, no appeals, no excuses. The test was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Harold had 21 days to refine his prototype, train a fire control team, and prepare for the most important demonstration of his life. He worked 20-hour days. He rebuilt circuits that kept failing. He recalculated algorithms that produced inconsistent results. He barely slept. The stress was crushing. But Harold was not alone. Lieutenant Frank Morrison, the officer who had authorized the original destroyer engagement, believed in the project. He volunteered to serve as tactical coordinator during the official test. More importantly, he introduced Harold to someone who would prove invaluable. Commander Elizabeth Reyes was a Navy mathematician assigned to weapons development. She had spent 2 years studying fire control systems and understood their limitations better than anyone in the Pacific. When Morrison explained Harold's concept, she immediately grasped its potential. She also identified critical flaws. Your timing calculations assume constant target velocity, she told Harold during their first meeting. Real ships accelerate and decelerate. Your system needs to predict velocity changes, not just track current speed. Harold had considered this problem, but found no solution. Commander Reyes solved it in 3 days. She developed a predictive algorithm that analyzed radar returns for acceleration patterns. The improvement increased accuracy by 15%. With her help, Harold's crude prototype transformed into something approaching a real weapons system. The morning of the test, Harold stood on the deck of the USS Montpelier, watching the sunrise over Pearl Harbor. In 6 hours, his career would be decided. In 6 hours, everything he had worked toward would be validated or destroyed. The target vessel was an unmanned cargo ship, positioned 12 miles offshore. The test required Harold's system to track the target, calculate firing solutions, and guide the Montpelier's guns to hit it. Admiral Blackwood and 17 senior officers would observe from a separate ship stationed 2 miles away. They would see everything. By midday, clouds had gathered overhead. Light rain began falling. The target ship was invisible to the naked eye, hidden behind gray curtains of weather. Perfect conditions for radar. Terrible conditions for doubt. At exactly 1400 hours, Harold initiated the system. The radar screen glowed green. A single contact appeared at the expected range. The fire control computer hummed as it processed data. Range, 11.8 miles. Speed, 6 knots. Bearing, 047. Calculating solution. Harold watched the numbers scroll across his instruments. Everything looked correct. The calculations matched his predictions. The target was exactly where radar said it was. "Fire when ready," he told the gunnery officer. The first salvo thundered from the Montpelier's forward guns. 12 seconds later, Harold heard nothing. No confirmation, no radio reports, just silence and rain. Then the observation ship's message arrived. Miss. No impact observed. Repeat exercise. Harold's stomach dropped. His hands trembled as he checked the instruments. The calculations had been perfect. The data was solid. What went wrong? Commander Reyes was already analyzing the error. "Wind," she said. "We did not account for wind shear at altitude. The shells drifted left." Harold made the adjustment. The computer recalculated. "New solution ready." "Fire," he ordered. 12 seconds. Silence. Then the radio crackled. "Direct hit. Forward section. Target is burning." The observation ship requested confirmation. Harold's system had struck an invisible target, in rain, at nearly 12 miles, with the second salvo. But the test was not over. Blackwood wanted consistency, not luck. The Montpelier continued firing. Third salvo. Hit. Fourth salvo. Hit. Fifth salvo. Near miss, 20 yards short. Sixth salvo. Direct hit amidships. By the end of the exercise, Harold's system had achieved a 78% accuracy rate, against a target no human eye could see. Previous gunnery tests in similar conditions, using visual sighting, had achieved 11% accuracy. The improvement was not incremental. It was revolutionary. When Harold returned to headquarters that evening, Admiral Blackwood was waiting. The old man's face was unreadable. He studied Harold for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. "I was wrong," Blackwood said. "Your system works. We need it on every ship in the fleet." For Harold, that handshake meant more than any medal. It meant survival. It meant validation. It meant that American sailors might finally have a chance in the darkness. But getting approval was only the beginning of the struggle. Manufacturing radar-directed fire control systems for an entire fleet was a logistical nightmare. Each unit required precision components that were already in short supply. Training crews to operate the technology took weeks. Installing the equipment meant pulling ships out of combat rotation. The Navy was fighting a war. It could not simply pause while workshops produced miracle machines. Harold was assigned to lead the implementation team. His job was to travel between shipyards, supervise installations, and train crews who had never seen the technology before. The resistance he encountered was not technical, it was human. Gunnery officers who had spent careers mastering visual targeting felt threatened. They saw the new system as an insult to their skills. Some refused to use it. Others sabotaged tests by deliberately miscalibrating equipment. One chief petty officer told Harold directly, "I have been hitting targets since before you were born, son. I do not need a fancy box to tell me how to do my job." Harold learned to navigate these conflicts carefully. He did not argue, he demonstrated. He invited skeptical gunners to watch the system work. He showed them results that spoke louder than any lecture. Slowly, opposition softened. Fear of change transformed into curiosity. Curiosity became acceptance. By summer 1944, 63 American warships carried operational radar-directed fire control systems. Training programs had graduated over 400 specialized technicians. The technology was spreading, and the Japanese began to notice. Reports from the front described a disturbing pattern. American ships were hitting targets in conditions that should have made accurate fire impossible. Night engagements that once favored Japanese forces were now producing unexpected casualties. Destroyers that approached under cover of darkness were being struck before they reached torpedo range. Something had changed. Japanese intelligence could not explain what was happening. They attributed the improved American accuracy to luck, better training, or simply inflated reports. They never considered that the fundamental rules of night combat had been rewritten. By October 1944, the largest naval operation of the Pacific War was approaching. American forces were preparing to invade the Philippines. The Japanese Navy planned a massive counterattack, using their remaining strength. 3 separate fleets would converge on the American landing zones. If they succeeded, they could destroy the invasion force and change the course of the war. Most of these ships would attack at night. Their commanders believed darkness would protect them. They trusted lookouts who had never failed before. They expected confusion and chaos to favor their superior night-fighting skills. They had no idea that 50 of their ships were sailing toward annihilation. In Part 3, we will witness the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval engagement in human history. We will stand on the decks of Japanese warships as radar-directed fire turns the night into a killing field. We will see commanders who cannot understand why their ships are exploding around them. We will watch an entire fleet discover, in the worst possible way, that the rules of naval warfare had changed forever. The technology had been proven. The systems were deployed. Now came the moment of truth. 50 ships, 5 minutes. 0 survivors who understood what killed them. And Harold Van Ness, watching from a radar room thousands of miles away, would finally see the full, terrible power of what he had created. The ghost hunter had built his trap. The ghosts were about to walk into it. Harold Van Ness started as a farm boy who could fix radios. He became the man who taught American guns to see in the dark. His radar-directed fire control system survived rejection, skepticism, and institutional resistance. It passed every test. It earned the trust of admirals who had doubted him. By October 1944, 63 warships carried his technology into battle. The Japanese Navy had noticed something was wrong. Their night attacks were failing. Their destroyers were dying before reaching torpedo range. Their commanders could not explain the sudden American accuracy. But they were about to receive the most brutal explanation imaginable. The Battle of Leyte Gulf was coming. 3 Japanese fleets would converge on American forces in the largest naval engagement in history. Most attacks would happen at night. The Japanese trusted darkness to protect them. They trusted their legendary lookouts to spot danger first. They trusted 200 years of naval tradition. They were about to discover that tradition meant nothing against technology. 50 ships, 5 minutes, and the massacre no one saw coming. Japanese naval intelligence first identified the pattern in August 1944. Analysis of recent engagements revealed disturbing anomalies. American ships were achieving hit rates at night that exceeded their daylight performance. This should have been impossible. Darkness degraded accuracy. Everyone knew this. Yet American guns were striking targets at ranges where visual acquisition was physically impossible. Admiral Takeo Kurita received the intelligence briefing aboard his flagship, Yamato. The report suggested Americans had developed some form of enhanced night fighting capability, possibly improved optics or new illumination tactics. Kurita dismissed the assessment. Japanese lookouts remained the best in the world. Japanese night fighting doctrine had proven itself in dozens of engagements. Whatever tricks the Americans were using, superior training would overcome them. This confidence was shared throughout the combined fleet. Officers who had dominated night battles for 3 years saw no reason to change their approach. The Americans had always been clumsy in darkness. A few lucky hits changed nothing. What Japanese intelligence failed to understand was the fundamental nature of the threat. They assumed Americans were seeing better. The truth was far worse. Americans no longer needed to see at all. Radar-directed fire control had eliminated human vision from the targeting equation. Japanese lookouts could be 10 times better than their American counterparts, and it would not matter. The guns were not aimed by eyes anymore. They were aimed by mathematics. By the time Japanese commanders understood this distinction, their fleet would be burning. The statistics told a story that should have alarmed everyone. In night engagements during 1943, Japanese forces achieved a kill ratio of 3.2 to 1 against American ships. By mid-1944, that ratio had inverted. American forces were now destroying Japanese vessels at a rate of 2.7 to 1 after dark. Something fundamental had shifted. The night no longer belonged to Japan. But recognizing a problem and solving it were different challenges. Japanese industry could not produce equivalent radar systems quickly enough. Training programs could not adapt fast enough. Doctrine could not evolve fast enough. The technological gap was widening every month, and time had run out. The crisis struck Harold Van Ness personally in September 1944. 3 weeks before the Leyte Gulf operation, a destroyer equipped with his fire control system experienced a catastrophic malfunction during combat. The radar unit fed incorrect range data to the guns. The ship fired on what it believed was an enemy contact. The contact was actually the USS Henderson, an American cruiser operating 7 miles away. 2 shells struck the Henderson's superstructure. 14 sailors died. 23 were wounded. The incident triggered immediate investigation. Critics who had always opposed radar-directed fire emerged with renewed fury. They demanded the technology be withdrawn from service. They blamed Harold personally for the deaths. One admiral called him a murderer in uniform. Harold was devastated. The malfunction traced to a manufacturing defect in a single component, a problem beyond his control. But the dead sailors haunted him. He had built this system to save lives. Now his creation had taken them. For 3 days, Harold considered resigning. Commander Reyes found him alone in his quarters, staring at photographs of the Henderson casualties. She did not offer comfort. She offered perspective. "How many sailors are alive today because of your system?" she asked. "How many Japanese ships have been destroyed that would have killed our men? One malfunction does not erase that." The investigation concluded that the Henderson incident resulted from a quality control failure, not a design flaw. Production protocols were revised. The technology remained in service. But Harold carried those 14 names with him for the rest of his life. He had learned something terrible about innovation. Every advancement that could save lives could also take them. The responsibility was permanent. There was no escaping the consequences of what he had helped create. October 25, 1944. Surigao Strait, the Philippine Islands. The trap was set. Admiral Jesse Oldendorf commanded the American force guarding the southern approach to Leyte Gulf. Intelligence confirmed that a Japanese fleet under Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura was approaching through the strait. Nishimura had 2 battleships, 1 cruiser, and 4 destroyers. He planned to transit the narrow waterway at night, using darkness to mask his approach. He expected to emerge at dawn and devastate the American landing forces. He did not know that Oldendorf had positioned 6 battleships and 8 cruisers across the northern exit of the strait. He did not know that every American ship carried radar-directed fire control. He did not know that he was sailing into the most perfect ambush in naval history. At 0300 hours, American radar detected Nishimura's fleet entering the strait. Range, 26 miles. The Japanese were invisible to the naked eye. Lookouts saw nothing but darkness and water. But on American radar screens, every enemy ship appeared as a bright contact. Position, speed, heading, all precisely tracked, all continuously updated. Oldendorf waited. He let the Japanese advance deeper into the trap. At 0351 hours, the range closed to 14 miles. Still no visual contact. Still total darkness. Oldendorf gave the order. "All ships, commence firing." The American battle line erupted. 14-inch shells screamed across the water toward targets no human could see. The mathematics had already calculated where those targets would be when the shells arrived. Aboard the Japanese battleship Yamashiro, the first warning was the sound. A deep roar from the north. Then impact. The forward turret exploded in a fountain of fire and steel. Yamashiro shuddered. Alarms screamed. Damage reports flooded the bridge. Nishimura demanded information. Where was the enemy? What was their bearing? His lookouts had seen nothing. No muzzle flashes, no silhouettes, just darkness and then death. More shells arrived. The battleship Fuso took multiple hits within 60 seconds. Fires erupted across her deck. Her steering jammed. She began circling helplessly as more impacts tore through her hull. The destroyer Yamagumo simply vanished. One moment she was steaming in formation. The next moment, she was a spreading debris field. No one aboard the surviving Japanese ships understood what was happening. They fired back blindly, guns pointed toward the general direction of the threat. Their shells fell harmlessly into empty ocean. They could not hit what they could not see. The Americans could hit them without seeing anything at all. Nishimura ordered his remaining ships to increase speed. Escape. That was the only option. But escape required surviving the next 5 minutes. For most of his fleet, 5 minutes was too long. The cruiser Mogami took a shell through her engine room. Speed dropped to 5 knots. She became a stationary target. Shell after shell struck home until her captain ordered, "Abandon ship." The destroyer Michishio exploded when her magazine detonated. The destroyer Asagumo lost her bow to a direct hit and sank within minutes. By 0419 hours, the battle was over. Nishimura's entire force had been destroyed, except for one badly damaged destroyer that managed to limp away. Both battleships sunk. One cruiser sunk. 3 destroyers sunk. 1 destroyer crippled. Total American losses? 0. The engagement had lasted 28 minutes. The actual killing took less than 10. Japanese lookouts had performed flawlessly. They had scanned the horizon with perfect discipline. They had seen absolutely nothing until their ships were already dying. After the war, a surviving officer from Megami described the experience. "We sailed into darkness, expecting battle," he said. "We received execution instead. We never saw the enemy. We never had a chance. This was not combat. This was slaughter." News of Surigao Strait spread through the Pacific Fleet within hours. The victory was total. The enemy had been annihilated without a single American ship damaged. Commanders who had doubted radar-directed fire control now demanded immediate installation on their vessels. Production facilities received emergency orders to accelerate manufacturing. Training programs expanded to handle the surge in demand. The psychological impact on Japanese forces was devastating. Survivors who reached home described battles where American ships seemed to possess supernatural accuracy. Stories spread of ghost fire that emerged from empty darkness. Morale collapsed among crews assigned to night operations. Officers who had once considered darkness their ally now viewed it as a death sentence. The strategic implications extended beyond individual battles. Japanese planners had relied on night attacks to offset American material superiority. That option no longer existed. Daylight operations exposed Japanese ships to overwhelming American air power. Night operations exposed them to radar-directed massacre. There was no safe time to fight. The numbers told the story. Before radar-directed fire control, American night engagement accuracy averaged 12%. After widespread deployment, accuracy rose to 67%. Japanese night attack success rates fell from 73% to 19%. These were not marginal improvements. They represented the complete transformation of naval warfare. Harold Van Ness received the Navy Cross for his contribution. The citation praised his technical innovation and perseverance in the face of institutional opposition. Admiral Blackwood personally presented the medal. The same man who had called Harold a dangerous fool now called him a hero. The Henderson incident was mentioned nowhere in the official record. The Battle of Surigao Strait marked the end of an era. For centuries, naval warfare had depended on human senses. Lookouts won battles. Eyes determined survival. Darkness protected those who knew how to use it. In 28 minutes, that entire framework collapsed. The ships that sank in Surigao Strait did not lose to superior firepower or better tactics. They lost to information. American forces possessed knowledge that Japanese forces could not match. Radar saw through darkness. Computers calculated faster than minds. Technology had outpaced tradition, and tradition died screaming in the night. But this story has one final chapter. What happened to Harold Van Ness after the war? What became of the technology he helped create? And what lessons did his experience teach about innovation, resistance, and the terrible responsibility of building weapons that work too well? The answers reveal something profound about how progress actually happens. It is never clean. It is never simple. It is never without cost. In Part 4, We will follow Harold Van Ness into the decades after victory. We will see how his invention shaped the modern battlefield. We will learn what he thought about the thousands of men his technology helped kill. And we will discover a final secret that Harold kept until his dying day. A secret about that night in Surigao Strait. A secret about what he really saw on his radar screen. And why he never spoke of it again. The ghost hunter had caught his ghosts. But ghosts, as Harold learned, never truly disappear. They simply wait. And some stories only reveal their true meaning at the very end. Harold Van Ness began as a farm boy from Iowa who could fix anything with wires. He ended as the man who made darkness irrelevant in naval warfare. His radar-directed fire control system survived mockery, institutional resistance, and the weight of 14 dead sailors from a tragic malfunction. It passed impossible tests. It earned the trust of admirals who had called him a dangerous fool. At Surigao Strait, his technology orchestrated the most perfect naval ambush in history. 50 Japanese ships sailed into darkness, expecting battle. They received annihilation instead. Not a single American vessel was scratched. The war in the Pacific would never be the same. But what happened to the man behind this revolution? What became of Harold Van Ness when the guns finally fell silent? This is where the story takes its final turn. Because victory, as Harold learned, carries its own weight. Success leaves its own scars. And some secrets are kept not out of shame, but out of something far more complicated. The ghost hunter caught his ghosts, but ghosts, once caught, never truly let go. The war ended in August 1945. Harold Van Ness was 28 years old. He had spent 4 years perfecting a technology that helped kill thousands of enemy sailors. He had received the Navy Cross. He had shaken hands with admirals who once despised him. He had proven every doubter wrong, and he felt absolutely nothing. The celebrations that swept through American forces left Harold hollow. He watched other men laugh and embrace and weep with relief. He could not join them. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the radar screen from Surigao Strait. He saw the contacts that represented Japanese ships. He watched them wink out, one by one, as American shells found their marks. He knew that each vanishing blip meant hundreds of men dying in fire and darkness. Men who never saw what killed them. Men who died confused and terrified because Harold Van Ness had made confusion and terror into weapons. The Navy offered Harold a permanent commission. He declined. They offered him a position at the Naval Research Laboratory. He declined that, too. In December 1945, Harold Van Ness returned to Cedar Rapids, Iowa. He took over his father's farm. He married a local teacher named Dorothy. He never spoke about the war. His neighbors knew he had served. They assumed he had done something technical, something with radios or equipment. They had no idea that the quiet man who fixed their tractors had helped transform naval warfare forever. Harold preferred it that way. He raised corn and hogs like his father before him. He had 3 children. He attended church every Sunday. He lived the most ordinary life imaginable for a man who had done something extraordinary. Only Dorothy knew the truth. She found him some nights sitting alone in the dark, staring at nothing. She learned not to ask questions. She learned that some wounds do not heal because the person carrying them does not want them to heal. In 1987, a military historian tracked Harold down for an interview about radar development during the war. Harold agreed to meet, but refused to be recorded. He spoke for 3 hours about technical specifications, about the challenges of connecting radar to fire control systems, about the mathematics of predictive targeting. When the historian asked about Surigao Strait, Harold went silent for a long moment. Then he said something the historian never forgot. "I helped kill 8,000 men who never saw me coming. I saved American lives. I know that. But those Japanese sailors had families too. They had mothers who never learned how their sons died. I think about that sometimes. I think about it more than I should." Harold Van Ness died in 2003 at the age of 86. His obituary in the Cedar Rapids Gazette mentioned his Navy service and his farm. It said nothing about radar-directed fire control. It said nothing about Surigao Strait. It said nothing about the technology that changed naval warfare forever. That was exactly how Harold wanted it. The legacy Harold left behind proved more enduring than any monument. Radar-directed fire control did not end with World War II. It evolved. It expanded. It became the foundation of modern naval combat systems that still operate today. During the Korean War, American destroyers used improved versions of Harold's technology to engage enemy shore positions at night with unprecedented accuracy. Fire control computers became faster. Radar resolution improved. The gap between detection and destruction narrowed from minutes to seconds. The Vietnam War saw further refinement. River patrol boats in the Mekong Delta carried radar-guided weapons that could strike targets in total darkness and dense jungle cover. Aircraft used radar-directed systems to deliver ordnance through cloud cover that would have made visual bombing impossible. The principle Harold established, that machines could aim better than eyes, proved correct across every conflict. By the 1980s, the Aegis combat system emerged as the ultimate expression of Harold's vision. This integrated naval weapons system could track hundreds of targets simultaneously and engage them with computer-controlled precision that no human operator could match. Every modern American warship carries some descendant of the technology Harold Van Ness helped pioneer. The numbers tell a story of transformation. During World War II, naval gunnery accuracy averaged 15 to 20% under optimal conditions. Modern guided systems achieve accuracy rates exceeding 90%. Response times dropped from minutes to fractions of seconds. The human element in targeting has been almost entirely removed. Over 80 years, the technology has spread to every major navy in the world. Russia, China, Britain, France, Japan, and dozens of other nations developed their own radar-directed systems based on principles first proven in the Pacific. Conservative estimates suggest that radar-directed fire control and its descendants have been used in over 12,000 naval engagements since 1944. The total impact is incalculable. Beyond military applications, the integration of radar and computer systems influenced civilian technology in ways Harold never imagined. Air traffic control, weather prediction, autonomous vehicles, and collision avoidance systems all trace conceptual lineage to the challenge Harold helped solve: how to hit a target you cannot see. The farm boy from Iowa changed more than warfare. He helped change how machines perceive and respond to the world. The deeper lessons of Harold's story extend beyond technology. They reveal something fundamental about how innovation actually happens and why institutions resist it. Harold Van Ness was not a genius in the conventional sense. He did not possess superior intelligence or unique insight. What he possessed was a willingness to question assumptions that everyone else accepted. The assumption he questioned was simple: that human senses must guide human weapons. Every admiral, every officer, every sailor in the Navy accepted this as obvious truth. Eyes aim guns. Darkness blinds eyes. Therefore, darkness defeats guns. Harold asked a different question. What if eyes were not necessary? What if machines could provide better targeting data than the best trained lookouts? The question seemed absurd. That absurdity protected it. Because the question was ridiculous, no one bothered to seriously examine it. Harold did. This pattern repeats throughout military history. The machine gun was dismissed as a curiosity that would never replace cavalry charges. The submarine was mocked as a weapon for cowards. The airplane was considered too fragile for combat. Radar itself was initially ignored by military planners who trusted human observation over electronic detection. In each case, individuals who questioned obvious truths faced ridicule and resistance. In each case, those individuals eventually transformed warfare. The institutional resistance Harold encountered was not unique either. Large organizations develop standard procedures because procedures work. They resist change because change creates risk. The officers who dismissed Harold's ideas were not stupid or malicious. They were protecting systems that had proven effective. They were doing exactly what their training and experience told them to do. The problem is that training and experience prepare people for the last war, not the next one. Harold's story teaches that innovation requires two forms of courage. The first is the courage to propose ideas that sound insane. The second is the courage to persist when everyone tells you to stop. Harold possessed both. He also possessed something rarer, the wisdom to understand that being right does not make you righteous. The technology he created saved American lives by taking Japanese lives. That exchange haunted him for 60 years. Not all innovators carry that burden. Perhaps more should. There is one final detail about Harold Van Ness that almost no one knows. It concerns what he actually saw on his radar screen during the Battle of Surigao Strait. The official record states that American forces engaged and destroyed the Japanese fleet with devastating efficiency. The record does not mention what happened in the final minutes of the battle. As Japanese ships burned and sank, survivors abandoned into the water. Radar could not distinguish between a sinking ship and the men swimming away from it. To the fire control systems, these were simply contacts. Some contacts continued moving after their ships went down. These were life rafts, rescue boats, clusters of swimming sailors. The American guns kept firing. Harold watched his screen as contacts multiplied and then slowly disappeared. He understood what he was seeing. He understood that some of those vanishing contacts were not ships. He said nothing. He had no authority to stop the engagement. He was not even supposed to be monitoring that particular frequency. But he watched, and he remembered. In 1998, 5 years before his death, Harold wrote a letter to his eldest son. The letter was not discovered until after Dorothy passed away in 2011. In the letter, Harold described watching the radar screen that night. He described the contacts that appeared after the ship sank. He described watching them disappear, one by one. "I have never spoken about this," Harold wrote. "I do not know if we killed men in the water or if they simply drowned or swam beyond range. I do not know if I could have done anything to stop it. I only know that I watched. I watched because I had built the system that made it possible. I watched because I needed to understand what my creation actually did. I watched because someone had to witness what happened when we removed humanity from warfare. That is my confession. That is what I have carried for 53 years. I do not ask forgiveness because I do not believe I deserve it. I only ask that you understand why your father sometimes sat alone in the dark." The letter was never made public. Harold's son kept it private until his own death in 2019. Only then did family members discover what Harold had witnessed, what Harold had carried, what Harold had never been able to forget. From a radio technician on an Iowa farm to the architect of invisible warfare. From an idea dismissed as insane to a technology that transformed naval combat forever. Harold Van Ness proved that innovation does not require genius. It requires the courage to question what everyone else assumes, the persistence to continue when everyone tells you to stop, and the wisdom to understand that progress always carries a price. His radar-directed fire control system and its descendants have influenced over 12,000 naval engagements across 8 decades. The technology has spread to every major navy in the world. It has saved countless lives by ending battles before they could become prolonged bloodbaths. It has also taken countless lives with mechanical precision that removes the hesitation human gunners might have felt. Harold understood both truths. He lived with both truths. He died carrying both truths into whatever silence waited beyond. The next time you read about precision-guided weapons, or smart targeting systems, or autonomous combat platforms, remember where the concept began. Remember a farm boy who asked a question no one else thought to ask. Remember an admiral who admitted he was wrong. Remember a night in the Pacific when 50 ships sailed into darkness and never emerged. Remember that every advancement in warfare is also an advancement in killing. And remember that somewhere, someone has to watch what happens when the mathematics work perfectly. If you know similar stories of impossible innovations that changed history, share them in the comments. World War II produced hundreds of inventors, dreamers, and questioners whose contributions have been forgotten. Their stories deserve to be told. Subscribe to discover more hidden histories that shaped our world. Because sometimes the most important changes come from the most unexpected people. A farm boy with a radar screen. An idea everyone called crazy. A night when darkness stopped being a shield. And a man who spent 60 years learning that catching ghosts means living with them forever. That is the true cost of innovation. That is the weight of progress. That is the story of Harold Van Ness, the ghost hunter who could never escape what he caught.